Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. About 2 years ago, I read an article in LAist about some children who had died in a fire in an apartment building. And the reason there was a fire is because the apartment complex was really in egregious condition, subhabitable, and didn't have heat, it had a lot of dry rot and mold, black mold in the building. It was a slum. And the reason that this building was allowed to continue like this is because the code enforcement entity in this particular city refused to go and inspect or enforce on the landlord because they had set up a whole bunch of criteria that the tenants had to go through under their ordinance in order to get the code enforcement. The tenants, for instance, had to be up on their rent, even though it was a subhabitable building. Some of the tenants were undocumented, and they were afraid, probably threatened by the landlord, of being evicted or turned over to ICE if they were to complain. Well, I was really shocked. Having been in local government, my city's code enforcement actually tried to make sure that all the buildings were habitable, regardless of the tenants or the status of the tenants. I found out that's not the case across California. And AB 838 seeks to change that. And it says simply that code enforcement in localities need to make sure that all the buildings in their districts meet basic safety and health standards. That's what the bill does. It's extremely, extremely simple, but very important for vulnerable tenants who are otherwise at times afraid to go directly to landlords. They should have another out. If they're scared of their landlord, they should be able to go to a city and say, my building doesn't have running water, it doesn't have heat. Please make the landlord bring this building up to code. With that, I would be happy to answer any questions, and I think that we do have witnesses in support. We have Cynthia Castillo from the Western Center on Law and Poverty and Brian Augusta from California Rural Legal Assistance Foundation. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you to the author, and let us now go to the main witnesses. To the operator, if we could acknowledge Ms. Cynthia Castillo.
Good afternoon, Chair and members. Cynthia Castillo with Western Center on Law and Poverty, here in support of AB 838, which we are proud to co-sponsor. AB 838 ensures tenants across the state can request an inspection of their home in response to a deficiency without having inappropriate conditions placed on the right to that inspection. As the state's largest and oldest support center, we hear from legal service providers across the state who represent low-income renters who sometimes face barriers when asking for an inspection to a habitability complaint. At times, they are told that before an inspector can make sure their housing is safe, that they must jump through hoops for the inspection to occur. California currently imposes uniform obligations on all landlords to maintain rental properties free from defects such as dangerous mold, defective wiring, leaks, and the like. Ensuring these obligations are met is a universal expectation. Every day, both tenants and landlords across the state work together swiftly to address concerns. But when that's not the case, costs for inspections can typically be recovered through fines and penalties assessed against bad-acting landlords who refuse to repair violations. This bill does not expand the obligations or liability of governments or landlords. It simply ensures existing obligations are enforced. 838 provides a backstop for the worst of the worst code violators among California landlords. The state and every local jurisdiction has an interest in ensuring landlords meet these obligations and do not allow properties to deteriorate as we work to solve our ongoing housing crisis and our current health crisis. AB 838 is a common sense bill that will ensure tenants are afforded equal rights to enforcement of our health and safety standards for housing, ensures our housing stock is protected and maintained, and that all of us are able to shelter in place as we have been directed to without having to put up with dangerous or unhealthy conditions in our homes. For all these reasons, we urge your support of this simple yet meaningful bill. Thank you.
Thank you. And now to Mr. Augusta.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Brian Augusta on behalf of the California Rural Legal Assistance California. In California, we've erected protections for tenants from unsafe housing, and we've given them specific rights to enforce those protections. And the author mentioned an example out of Los Angeles, but in rural communities as well, we face the same problems, often significant problems with inconsistent enforcement and other barriers. And then on top of that, you have policies such as the ones that this bill would address, which prevent enforcement with rules like we don't inspect if there's an eviction case pending, or we don't enforce if the rent hasn't been paid, or we don't inspect Section 8 units. All of those directly frustrate the protections that this legislature has enacted to ensure that tenants can access those rights. And the result is tenants forced to live in dangerous and substandard conditions we're unable to get just a representative of the government to come, an inspector who's tasked with protecting the public, and make a basic inspection and document the problems. And that leaves them vulnerable both to unsafe conditions, but also eviction, intimidation, and retaliation in exactly the way that the author was describing. So for all of those reasons, we would urge an aye vote on this very simple measure.
Thank you. There are no witnesses in opposition, so at this time we'll open it up to public comment. Look to see if there's anyone in this committee room who wishes to speak. See none, let's go to the remote stations. And unless there's anyone in the remote stations, let's go to the operator. If you could please open up the lines for members of the public that wish to speak in support or in opposition to AB 838 Friedman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If you would like to provide public comment for AB 838, please press 1, then 0. That command again, 1, then 0. And line 193, your mic is open. Line 193, your mic is open.
Yes.
Line 218, your mic is open.
Mr. Chair and members, Rand Martin on behalf of the AIDS Healthcare Foundation and its Healthy Housing Foundation in strong support. Thank you.
Line 178, your mic is open.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. Eric Payne, Executive Director of the Central Valley Urban Institute. We stand in strong support of AB 838. Thank you.
Line 219, your mic is open.
Hello, Kelly Bean with HealthNet and California Health and Wellness, serving almost 2 million Medi-Cal members across California in support of AB 838. Thank you.
Line 220, your mic is up. Oh, I apologize. Line 114, your mic is open.
Rebecca Gonzalez, National Association of Social Workers, California chapter in support.
Line 177, your mic is open.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members. Kareem Greasy on behalf of the California Association of Realtors. CAR will oppose AB 838 until it is amended to close a loophole in its provisions.
Line 199, your mic is open.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members. Anya Lawler on behalf of the Public Interest Law Project in support.
Line 142, your mic is open.
David Wheatley, an individual in strong support.
Line 220, your mic is open.
Kate Bell on behalf of the California Rental Housing Association in opposition.
And Mr. Chair, there are no further comments at this time.
Thank you. Let's bring it back to the committee. Any comments? Mr. Kara.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank the author for bringing this forward. As someone that's represented tenants in landlord-tenant court, there's no doubt, and particularly in situations where tenants were being evicted and didn't realize that there were numerous violations of the implied warranty of habitability in their units, and they would respond by saying, well, yeah, I'd bring it up, but they would never do anything about it. They would never fix it, you know, and at the end of the day, there are basics, and the idea that somehow people want to go to their local enforcement agent as if that's convenient for them, they go because it's a last resort, because their issues haven't been dealt with. And I get those that are responsible landlords, you know, that they're, you know, look, my family has investment property. We rent out homes, including Section 8. We've never had anyone contact the local enforcement agency because we keep the properties in very good condition. If there's an issue, it's resolved immediately. If that's the kind of landlord you are, then no one's going to feel the need to go. The reality is that there are bad actors, and I get that good actors sometimes have to have extra burdens placed on themselves because of the bad actors. But the reality is that when it comes to someone's home, we have to have standards in place that allow them to have the basic health and safety standards that our local governments have the responsibility to enforce. And they shouldn't have to show that they're up on their rent. They shouldn't have to show that they sent 5 notices to the landlord. The reality is that separate from that, these standards must be upheld. And so I appreciate this bill and would certainly like to move it at this time.
There's been a motion to move this bill forward. Is there a second? All right, there's a second. Any other comments to our Vice Chair?
So, when you're dealing with landlords and tenants, that is a shared responsibility, the cleanliness, the healthfulness of where they live. And what I see is a lot of bills that keep all of the responsibility on the landlord, despite their lack of ability to control everything that goes on inside their rental unit. I know of one situation in particular. The house actually got burned down to the ground. It was rebuilt brand new from the ground up, and within 6 months it was in deplorable condition again. Not because the landlord was a deficient landlord, it's because the tenant made those conditions happen. And so, I would like to see bills that have a little bit more balance between, who's responsible for tearing up the property. On the other hand, I have had a front row seat in areas. Doggone it. So I've had a front row seat in areas where basically you have slumlords, and those are deplorable conditions. And the housing authority in the city that I worked in, they did go handle those. But the more it seems we shift all of the responsibility onto the landlord, I think the more we have the irresponsible tenant side of this. So, I struggle with these because I know both sides. And I just wish we would not continue to paint landlords as the bad guys in all these, because I believe me, there is plenty of shared responsibility. And unless this bill would help discern who is actually responsible for the condition of the property and hold them responsible for that, not just the landlord, then it's hard for me to support it. So those are my comments. Thanks.
Any other comments? I just want to thank the author for your continued work on this issue. I think we all agree that everyone deserves a home that's safe and free from hazardous conditions. And as someone who has authored legislation to tackle lead paint hazards in our state's homes, I'm happy to support this bill. I look forward to seeing it move through the legislative process. And with that, any final comments?
Sure. Just a quick response to Mr. Seauto. I appreciate the comment. Maybe you are referring to a different bill, because this bill doesn't put any new responsibility on landlords whatsoever. This bill actually puts a responsibility on municipalities to do inspections to make sure that the current responsibilities that landlords all have to provide a habitable residence is being done. Rather than telling tenants, I'm sorry, we won't enforce. We're not going to go and inspect because we don't like you. That's kind of like if you have a safety recall in your car, allowing the car company to say to you, we don't have to give you a recall because you're a little bit arrears on your payment. We should expect our landlords to provide what's already under the law of a habitability. Who's responsible? We don't change any of that burden. They can always go to a tenant if they think a tenant has damaged something. But it's inconceivable to me that we have cities, very few, but we have a few cities in the state that are refusing to do code enforcement, that are refusing to do inspections. That's what this bill is about. Changes nothing for landlords whatsoever. It changes the responsibility of municipalities. And the fact that we have had children die in this state, and I'm happy to show you the article, because a city refused to go to those slumlords and have them enforce. Instead, they told the tenants that they were behind on their rent, and so it was all up to them to live a certain way. And children died because of that. And with that, I would request an aye vote to protect our vulnerable tenants. Thank you.
Thank you. With that, Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Motion to pass to the Assembly Committee on Appropriations. Chu.
Aye.
Chu, aye. Seauto.
No.
No. Gabriel. Aye. Gabriel, aye. Colra. Aye. Colra, aye. Kylie. Kylie, no. Mainshine. Cork Silva.
Aye.
Cork Silva, aye. Weeks. Aye. Weeks, aye. 5-2.
Your measure passes. Thank you.